At the end of the 19th century, European powers set their sights on Africa, a continent rich in resources and untapped potential. Through a brutal race for colonies, they carved up the land, redrawing borders and devastating local communities. From the infamous Berlin Conference to the violent conquests by European armies, Africa was transformed into a battleground for imperial ambitions. But how did this ruthless scramble for control shape the future of an entire continent? In this video, we'll explore the forgotten history of Europe's conquest and division of Africa, and the lasting scars it left behind. The First European Expedition. In the 19th century, as the world domination ambitions of European powers became increasingly fervent, they were driven by boundless greed for colonies and eagerly expanded their global influence. Great Britain, with its superior naval power, conquered vast India and established long-standing colonies in North America and Australia. Meanwhile, neighboring France also aggressively expanded its imperial power, especially in North America. Not to be outdone, the Iberian powers of Spain and Portugal established absolute dominance in South America. Although Africa had been devastated by the transatlantic slave trade, most of the continent had not yet been affected by the waves of European colonial invasion. The Dark Continent, with its abundant resources and immense economic potential, quickly attracted the attention of European explorers and cartographers who paved the way for future invasion ambitions. Among them, David Livingstone, the renowned Scottish explorer, embarked on deep explorations into the interior of Africa, uncharted lands unknown to Europeans. Initially, European powers only established small trading settlements along the African coast, primarily to serve the transatlantic slave trade. However, in 1807, Britain passed a law banning the slave trade, officially abolishing the slave system. The United States also followed suit with a ban on the importation of slaves in 1808. However, the end of the slave trade did not mean that European colonialism would come to a halt. On the contrary, it acted as a catalyst, accelerating the process of invasion and colonization in Africa. European countries began a race to seize African territories. In 1830, France invaded Algeria. In 1877, Britain occupied Cape Colony, or South Africa. And in 1874, Britain took control of the Gold Coast, Ghana. Portugal, with a presence since the 15th century, continued to control colonies in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau. By the 1870s, Europe had gained control over 10% of the African continent, marking the beginning of a dark period in the continent's history. The cause of expansion. Besides the ambition of hegemony, a series of key factors in the 19th century contributed to the promotion of Europe's colonial ambitions in Africa. Firstly, England, the most powerful empire at that time, was facing an increasing trade deficit, exporting more than importing. This economic puzzle forced England to seek new markets to consume goods and offset the deficit. The situation became more urgent when the Great Depression, one of the worst economic crises in history, occurred in 1873. Europe, especially England, was heavily affected, and many countries had to implement more protectionist economic policies. In that context, Africa, with abundant natural resources and a large market, emerged as an attractive solution for European powers, especially England. Secondly, fierce competition among European kingdoms has always been the main driving force behind imperialism. The vast resources and economic potential of Africa further intensified this competition. Whoever controls more land will have a competitive advantage in the race for power and influence. Thirdly, Africa also has a strategically important position, located at the crossroads of trade routes between Europe and Asia. Africa serves as a bridge for international trade activities. The Suez Canal in Egypt and the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa are two key strategic positions that control this vital transportation route. For England, controlling these two areas is crucial to protect their interests in India and China. Finally, the rise of two new European powers, Italy and Germany, also accelerated the competition for influence in Africa. Italy officially unified in 1861 and Germany in 1871. Eager to assert their positions on the international stage, both countries plunged into the race for colonies. The prevailing belief at that time was that no country could rise to become a great power without possessing any overseas territories. The beginning of the military conflict. In the 1880s, as the European colonial competition in Africa reached its peak with rapid expansion, France annexed Tunisia in 1881, followed by the Congo in 1882. Not to be outdone, Germany occupied Namibia, Togo, and Cameroon in 1884. In the same year, Spain also established a colonial territory in Morocco. Egypt, with its strategic location and the important Suez Canal, soon became the focus of attention for both France and Britain. Taking advantage of the financial difficulties of Egyptian leader Ismail Pasha, both powers increased their intervention in the country's economy. In 1879, a nationalist uprising, known as the Arabi Revolt, erupted to resist the influence of Turkey in Europe. Seizing this opportunity, Britain launched a large-scale military invasion, suppressed the uprising, and established its rule over Egyptian territory. Meanwhile, driven by personal ambition and boundless greed, King Leopold II of Belgium established the International Association of the Congo in 1876. He sent renowned explorer Henry Morton Stanley to Congo to sign agreements with local chiefs in order to seize their land. Due to their lack of understanding, most chiefs did not realize the true nature of the agreements they signed. By 1885, Leopold II named this area the Congo Free State, now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, and declared this vast land as his personal property. Berlin Conference. In November 1884, a historic turning point event took place in Berlin, Germany. The conference, convened by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, aimed to discuss the issue of colonialization in Africa. The conference brought together representatives from 16 countries, including European powers such as Germany, Austria-Hungary, Spain, Denmark, France, England, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Sweden, Norway, along with the Ottoman Empire, the United States, and representatives from the Congo region of King Leopold. The main objective of the Berlin Conference was to establish rules for the peaceful invasion and division of Africa among European powers in order to avoid conflicts among themselves. A notable point is that the conference provided effective principles for occupation and the means for European countries to justify their annexation of new territories. Accordingly, a nation could declare sovereignty over a territory if they had a treaty with local leaders, planted their flag on that territory, and established a government to manage it, while maintaining order through police forces. The Berlin Conference also recognized existing colonial territories, including the personal possessions of King Leopold II in the Congo Free State. For Germany and Chancellor von Bismarck personally, the successful organization of the Berlin Conference affirmed Germany's position as a new power on the international stage. However, ironically, the Berlin Conference, despite determining the fate of the entire African continent, did not involve any representatives from Africa itself. Africa and its people were turned into a delicious cake for European powers to tear apart at their own discretion, without any right to voice their opinions or objections. Europe has accomplished its conquest. The Berlin Conference opened a dark era of imperialism on this continent. After the conference, the scramble for colonies became more intense, resulting in almost the entire continent of Africa falling into the hands of 7 European powers within a few decades. Britain, after occupying Egypt in 1882, continued to expand its power southward annexing Sudan in 1888, followed by Nigeria and Kenya in the same year, and Uganda in 1890. Not stopping there, Britain also sought to dominate South Africa after defeating the Boer republics, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State, in the Second Boer War in 1902. Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and Zambia also came under the control of the British South Africa Company in 1889. Italy, although coming later, was not any less greedy in this scramble for colonies. They annexed Eritrea in 1885, Somalia in 1889, and Libya in 1911. The acquisition of Eritrea and Somalia gave Italy a significant position in the Horn of Africa. France, with a strong influence in West Africa, continued to expand its territory by occupying Niger in 1890, Burkina Faso in 1896, Chad in 1900, and Mauritania in 1902. The German Empire, after the Berlin Conference, also asserted control over Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, merging them into German East Africa. The Berlin Conference thus deeply engraved itself in the history of Africa as a symbol of the greed of Western imperialism. By 1914, only Liberia and Ethiopia remained fragilely independent, while 90% of the African continent had been divided and became colonies of the 7 European powers. Technology of imperialism. The conquest of Africa by the European powers was swift and brutal, largely due to their technological superiority over the native populations. Ironclad steamships, a revolutionary invention, allowed Europeans to penetrate deep into the interior of Africa by navigating upstream. Previously, accessing these lands was nearly impossible due to treacherous terrain and strong river currents. It can be said that without steamships, the rapid and effective conquest of Africa would have been unlikely. The initial ambition of the Europeans encountered a formidable obstacle: malaria. This mosquito-borne disease claimed the lives of countless European explorers and soldiers. For example, during William Bolt's expedition to Mozambique from 1777 to 1779, 132 out of 152 members perished from malaria. Similarly, in 1841, an English expedition led by Captain Trotter lost 55 out of 152 people to this deadly disease, while navigating the Niger River on 3 ironclad steamships. A turning point came in 1854, when Dr. William Balfour Beatty, captain of the steamship Pleiad, used quinine, a drug effective in treating malaria, for his crew. His ship navigated the Niger River upstream and returned safely without any casualties. This breakthrough discovery opened the door for the massive wave of European invasion into Africa. At the same time, significant advancements in weapon technology created a tremendous power imbalance between Europeans and the native populations. The 1860s witnessed the emergence of breech-loading firearms, followed by innovations in rifled muskets, machine guns, and conical-shaped bullets. All of these developments led to the creation of modern firearms, culminating in the first fully automatic machine gun, the Maxim gun, in 1884. Although firearms were sold to some tribes in North Africa and coastal regions through European traders, deep inland, the native population still relied on primitive weapons such as spears and bows and arrows. Before quinine was widely used, the disparity in weaponry was not a significant issue because malaria itself acted as an invisible shield protecting the native populations from European invasion. However, when quinine rendered this invisible barrier ineffective, combined with the overwhelming power of modern firearms, Europeans easily crushed any resistance. The Battle of Omdurman during the British conquest of Sudan in 1898 is the clearest evidence of this power disparity. 25,000 British Egyptian troops, equipped with 20 Maxim guns and 4 cannons, faced off against 50,000 Sudanese soldiers. The result was a bloody massacre. 12,000 Sudanese soldiers were killed, while the British only lost 48 men. Colonial crime. Although having superior technology, Europeans often faced strong resistance from African people who were determined to protect their homeland and freedom. In Sudan, the Mahdist movement erupted in 1881, directly challenging the rule of Britain and Egypt under the leadership of Muhammad Ahmad, who proclaimed himself as the Mahdi, meaning the guided one in Arabic. This movement attracted widespread support from the Sudanese people. Not only did the Mahdist forces resist against Britain and Egypt, but they also expanded their influence to neighboring countries, leading to conflicts with Italy, Ethiopia, and the Free State of Congo. Despite being ultimately defeated in the Battle of Omdurman, the Mahdist movement demonstrated the spirit of the Sudanese people against the ambitions of European powers. In Tanzania, the Germans also faced strong resistance from the indigenous population. The harsh and brutal governance policies of the Germans sparked an armed uprising led by Kinjekitile Ngwale. Ngwale, a respected witch doctor, claimed to possess a type of potion that could turn enemy bullets into water. The Maji Maji rebellion spread throughout Tanzania. However, the Germans brutally suppressed this uprising, using both military force and ruthless tactics, such as burning crops, causing widespread famine, and taking the lives of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. The brutal genocide policy of Germany was not limited to Tanzania. From 1904 to 1907, the German army carried out a systematic extermination campaign targeting the Herero and Namakwa people in Namibia. They destroyed crops, poisoned water sources, pushed the indigenous population into starvation and disease. The result was a horrifying genocide. 80% of the Herero people and 50% of the Namakwa people were wiped out. In the Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902, the British detained around 150,000 Boer people, mainly women and children, in about 40 concentration camps. Living conditions in these camps were extremely poor, lacking food, medicine, and safe shelter, leading to rampant diseases. An estimated 28,000 Boer people died in the British concentration camps due to illness, hunger, and harsh living conditions. However, perhaps the most horrific crime of European colonialism occurred in the Free State of Congo, owned personally by King Leopold II of Belgium. In order to maximize the abundant rubber resources in Congo, Leopold II imposed a brutal forced labor regime on the indigenous people. They were forced deep into the forests to harvest rubber, subjected to harsh labor quotas and cruel punishments. Those who did not meet the targets would have their hands cut off. Even children were not spared. During Leopold II's rule, 1885 to 1908, an estimated 10 million Congolese people perished. Heritage. The post-war period in Africa is a volatile time, marked by waves of revolutionary movements for independence that swept across the continent. The rise of the African intellectual class ignited the flame of freedom for millions of people. Leaders like Patrice Lumumba of Congo and Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana became symbols of national spirit and the desire for freedom throughout the Black continent. However, the path to independence was not always smooth. Some African countries, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, achieved relatively peaceful independence through referendums and negotiations. But for many other countries, freedom could only be attained through bloodshed and tears. Algeria is a prime example, as they had to endure 7 years of resistance against the powerful French army at the cost of millions of innocent lives. Similarly, Angola had to shed blood for 13 long years to break free from the rule of Portugal. But independence is only the beginning of a challenging journey. The heavy legacy of colonialism continues to haunt the Black continent to this day. One of the most harmful legacies is the existence of illogical national borders arbitrarily drawn by European powers during the period of African partition. These borders are not based on geographical, cultural, or ethnic factors, but solely serve the interests of colonial powers. The consequence is that when African countries gained independence, these artificial borders became the seeds of ethnic conflicts, territorial disputes, and political instability. The Mandinka or Malinka people in West Africa are a typical example. With a population of over 11 million, they are divided into citizens of 10 different countries, causing difficulties for the economic, cultural, and social development of this community. The division caused by colonialism has sparked numerous bloody civil wars and even genocides, pushing the Black Continent into a spiral of violence and instability. The deep wounds left by colonialism have made Africa face countless challenges in building a peaceful and prosperous future.